Hey guys, it's Alex, and today I'm here with a book review for The Ocean Within by V.M. Caldwell. This is a middle grade novel about a young foster child who's placed with a new family for adoption. The book follows Elizabeth as she gets used to being with the family, as she adjusts to them, as she learns about who they are, and as she learns a lot more about herself as well. I gave this book 5 stars. This was one of my favorite books when I was a kid. I read it so many times, checked it out from the library, that my parents eventually just went ahead and bought it for me so that I wouldn't bug them to go to the library just for this specific book. I absolutely adored it then, and it's one that I do still think holds up, although as an adult, it does have some issues, but not enough issues that I would give it fewer than 5 stars because I still love it. To start with the positives, I absolutely adore the dynamic between Elizabeth and the new family. Elizabeth is a very shy, very reserved person. She likes to be on her own, she likes to be quiet, she doesn't speak very much. She's not an athletic person, and she's placed with this family, the Sheridans. They're a very big family. Apart from her foster parents and her 2 foster siblings, she's spending the summer with Mrs. Sheridan, the family matriarch, the grandmother, as well as a bunch of other cousins. There are, I think, about like 7 or 8 or 9 cousins, quite a few, and they're all very loud, they're very boisterous, they're very energetic and outgoing, they never stop talking, and they're very athletic. And Elizabeth doesn't really have anything in common with them, so she finds it very difficult to live in this house, and they find it very difficult to live with her. I really love how that dynamic was explored on both sides. Of course, it's difficult for Elizabeth. Like, from the very beginning, we empathize with her, we understand what she's feeling, we understand why she feels so singled out and so alone and so separate. But you can also understand this family's reaction, that these kids in this family, they come from a very close-knit family, they talk to each other, they're very open with each other, and they can ask Elizabeth to play and she'll say no, and then they ask her the next day to play with them and she'll say no, and they're fine with that. But when they're repeatedly asking her to play with them and she's repeatedly saying no, you see them starting to pull away as well, and you see this dynamic explored on both sides, that like it's not just Elizabeth who's having the hard time, the family is as well, because they're reaching out and getting nothing back. And of course, like, no one blames Elizabeth for that. None of the adults blame Elizabeth for that. But the kids do, because they're kids and they don't understand. And I really enjoyed that, because you do get to see both sides. You don't see this family who's just incredibly open all the time and incredibly accepting of all behavior. They don't know how to react when someone is rejecting them the way Elizabeth has rejected them. And I love that. I love that you see both sides. I love that you're, of course, understanding of Elizabeth, and you're in Elizabeth's head this whole book. So you know exactly why she's acting this way, but the other kids in the family don't, and they're not always quite as understanding. And I love that. I think it's very interesting to explore that kind of dynamic, and I think it was done so well. I also really love Elizabeth's character. I think she's incredibly well developed, and as a child and as an adult, I found myself easily relating to her, even though she's in this situation that I've never been in, can't imagine being in, that's so different from my life. She's still so easy to relate to. She's so easy to understand. I think V.M. Caldwell did an amazing job crafting this character for a kid's book, when a lot of kids haven't been in this situation where they're a foster child on the path to adoption with this family that they don't really get along with. Most kids have not been in that situation, but she made it so easy to understand what Elizabeth was feeling, what she was experiencing, what was going on. You're in her head, but you understand her so much better. And I think she did a wonderful job with that for both children and adults. I just think Elizabeth is a fantastic character, and she's one of my favorite middle grade characters, I think. One random thing that I do really like, I'm not usually a fan of first-person present tense books, because you get the characters' direct thoughts a lot more in those. You just hear what they're thinking. It's part of the regular narration. In this book, Caldwell does kind of a variation of that. It's in third person, but occasionally, every few pages or so, or sometimes multiple times on one page, there are italicized lines that are Elizabeth's direct thoughts, and they're much more infrequent than in like a first-person present tense book they would be. And I really enjoyed them, because you do get these insights into Elizabeth's thoughts, just like you see her fear, you see her worry, you see her stress and like her plans, and It's very interesting. I normally don't like that kind of thing at all, but in this book, it just made me feel so much more connected with Elizabeth. I do have 3 problems that I wanted to discuss before I just end this video with this book is amazing. I definitely recommend reading it if you like middle grade contemporaries. But I do want to talk about some of the negatives. The first and the biggest for me is the spanking in this book. The grandmother spanks the grandchildren. I really don't like that. I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think anyone who keeps a paddle specifically for hitting children is someone that I can get behind. And I don't like how it's dealt with in this book. It's not seen as a negative. A few characters point out that it's a negative, but in the general narration, spanking is kind of like an initiation into the family. It's a part of the family. It's seen as a very like positive thing. Like obviously none of the kids like to be spanked, but it is seen through the narration as like this means you're part of the family now. And I was very uncomfortable with that. I was always uncomfortable with that as a child as well. It's not something I support or will ever support, but just as an adult, it was just especially obvious that like this book would have been so wonderful without that. Just so wonderful, and I don't know. I really hated the inclusion of the spanking. I'll also add that I'm not the biggest fan of the ending. I think it's wrapped up too quickly. I think Elizabeth needed more time to deal with her situation. Instead, it's all kind of thrown together at the end and a big happy ending is slapped on it. And I think if she was going to end it where she did, if V.M. Caldwell was going to end it where she did, I think she needed to leave it a little bit more open-ended, to leave Elizabeth more room for growth than just wrapping it all up right there. I understand that it is a middle grade novel, so like sometimes things are a little bit more simplistic, but I wish she'd taken more time with Elizabeth, because so much of this book is Elizabeth with one mindset, and then the ending is very quickly changing Elizabeth's whole mindset, Elizabeth's whole world, and I think it happened much too quickly, and it needed more time. It needed more time, or it needed a slightly more open ending. She could have easily ended it with Elizabeth starting the process instead of Elizabeth going through the entire process of adjusting to this family. And I think I struggled with just appreciating it as much as I did the rest of this book. My final issue is the adults in the story, and I'm not sure how much of this critique is me critiquing the story itself or just critiquing the characters as people. Like, oh, I don't agree with this person's actions, but it worked for the story. I'm not sure where to draw the line there, because it is a middle grade book, so it does change things a little. It's just, I wish the adults had been more responsible. I think there was a lot of irresponsibility on the adults in this book. I think Elizabeth is a foster child with clear abandonment issues. Like, her parents died when she was like 5. She's 11 in this book. She's been through a couple of different foster families. She's been in groups and basically orphanages, I guess. I don't really know when this book is set. It was published quite a while ago. And it's just not handled by the adults particularly well. Her foster parents sent her to the beach with the grandmother. They're not going. Not for the first 2 months of the summer. So after only knowing this girl who has abandonment issues for a couple of months, they're sending her to a different adult where they're not going to be. And it just seemed very poorly done on their part, and I'm not sure how much of that is just me critiquing them as people, that was a bad decision, and how much of that is me critiquing the book, because I wish there had been more responsible adults in this book. I wish they'd handled the situations better. I'll also say, in addition to the parents not being with her for a lot of the summer, even though they've really only just met her and she's very new to their house and their family, no one really tries to talk with Elizabeth very much in depth about her situation with the family. All of her previous foster placements have been temporary, either intentionally temporary, you'll stay here until we find an adoption route for you, or they've gone the adoption route and then decided that she wasn't a good fit for their family, or what have you. Everywhere she's been so far has been temporary, and no one really tries to sit her down in this book and really explain that it's not temporary. They're not looking at it as temporary. They're planning for the future, and they're planning for her to be a part of their future. And it just seems like something that, and not one conversation, obviously, but that needs to be something that's kind of reiterated consistently throughout their life with Elizabeth. And it seemed very poorly handled, because Elizabeth is going through this book this is a temporary situation. At the end of the summer, I'll leave and then go back and be placed with a new foster family. and they're looking at it very differently, which I feel like is obvious to the reader. That's the point of this book. But it's just not handled by the adults very well. And I really wish there had been adults in this book that handled it well, because you could have had the same book. You could have had the same girl who was like looking at it as temporary and having abandonment issues and being very shy and reserved and not dealing well in this family situation, and still had adults who were doing the responsible thing and behaving appropriately. And it kind of irks me that they weren't. I didn't notice that as a child. That didn't bother me at all as a child, I think, because a lot of the times as a child you just ignore the adults in books anyway. They're just authority figures. They're not like full people on their own, because like when you're 8, adults aren't people, only children are people. And so that didn't bother me. But as an adult, I wanted to see the adults really step up in this book, because they could have, and it could have been the same book. It didn't need to like drastically change anything about this. I just wish it had all been handled better, and I think it could have easily been handled better, and it wasn't, and that does kind of frustrate me. But again, not enough to not give this 5 stars. It's probably my nostalgia that does push this past the 4-star mark for me, because I do think I would maybe feel differently about it if I read it for the first time as an adult, but I am so clouded by my nostalgia and my prior love for this book that I really do think it's wonderful. I think the characters in this are wonderful. I think Elizabeth and her dynamic with her family are wonderful. I do have some things that I wish were a little bit better, but I would still recommend this. If you like middle grade contemporary novels, I'd highly recommend this, because I think it is lovely and I think it's very charming, and I think Elizabeth is just a fantastic and a compelling main character, and it's very much worth a read, even with the issues. Let me know down below if you've read The Ocean Within and what you thought of it if you have. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see y'all again soon.